the moment of truth. Anybody in this audience have dyslexia? Show of hands. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Some more, thank you. That's almost a fair assessment. We've got about 20% of the general population has dyslexia. That's 1 in 5 people. And I think that dyslexia is most commonly understood as this reading issue. We have a tendency of flipping our B's and our D's and our Q's and our G's, and that's, I think that's a fair assessment, at least in the symptomatic department. But I want to take this opportunity to speak a little bit more in depth about the neuroscience of dyslexia. So we have this outer layer of our brain called the cortex, okay? And we all know that we have these little things, or maybe we don't know, but we have these little things called mini columns, okay? And these mini columns serve as telephone poles, if you will. What strings together on these mini columns are our axons, okay? Now, people with autism, for example, have axons that are extremely closely located in proximity to each other. And as a result, their axon lengths are very, very finite and short. And as a result, they are able to do these incredibly detailed, highly specific patterns and behaviors and skills, right? Well, dyslexics are on the other side of that spectrum. We have our mini columns that are spaced very, very far apart. As a result, our axon lengths are significantly longer. And this actually lends to some significant cognitive advantages. We have an ability to look at a situation and identify seemingly disparate pieces of information and blend those into a narrative or a tapestry that makes sense to us that most people can't see. So this translates into an exceptional level of success in 4 major vocational paths. That's entrepreneurship, engineering, architecture, and the arts. I just want you to please remember that because it comes up later in this discussion. Dyslexia comes with a cost, though, okay? We have an incredibly difficult time doing what's called phonetic decoding. Okay, that's the most complex word I'm going to use, and I hope you're impressed by it. Phonetic decoding is essentially our ability to identify these squiggly lines, translate those lines into a sound in our mind, and then string those sounds together to compose a word. For dyslexics, that takes 5 times more energy than a normal brain. So to give you a little bit of a historical context on dyslexia, I'll go back and start off with the first 9/10 of human existence, right? Societies were largely based on apprentice models, right? From hunter and gatherers down to the trades in more recent times, people learned by observing and then doing kinesthetic learning. Now this happens to be the wheelhouse for dyslexics. This is our prime opportunity to learn. Then there was this little twist in history, okay? It was called the Industrial Revolution. And what happened during the Industrial Revolution is the society said, okay, we've got this new form of economy, and what we need to do is we need to educate the masses to become effective worker bees in these factories. Now that dovetailed historically with the importation of the printing press from Europe. And so everyone was incredibly excited that they had this newfound technology that would enable us to embed knowledge into a format that could then be scaled and distributed on a national level. Now this served society tremendously well, except for the fact that at that very moment, you essentially locked the door on 20% of the population, right? Those of us with dyslexia. So what does the dyslexic experience feel like? Of those that raise their hands, we certainly know, but I'll illuminate it for the rest of you. I ask you to kind of take a stroll back to that sepia-toned images of your 7, 8, 9-year-old years, right? Where school was this montage of recess and nap time and snack time. The world was a really good place, right? And then all of a sudden, at one point, they kind of tightened the screws a little bit, and they said, okay, we're going to introduce our first benchmark of intelligence. They didn't put it that way, but that's what they were doing. They said, we're going to learn how to read. And all of a sudden, for those of us with dyslexia, our world changed overnight. We realized, looking at our peers, that what everyone else was doing effortlessly, we had an incredible time trying to do. And we actually not only failed on day 1, but we failed on day 2 and 3 and 4 and so on. And the years started to compound where we were exposed to this level of failure that became so commonplace that we started to wear this shroud of shame. There's a psychologist named Dr. Gershon Kaufman. Dr. Kaufman studies shame. Dr. Kaufman says that people who cannot read or who have difficulty learning how to read feel the same level of shame as people who've engaged in incest. Yeah. So you can imagine what it's like. Again, you see that yourself, many, many years ago, and you realize that after a while, you're burdened with this shame, and then all of a sudden you get this reinforcement, negative, albeit, where you're walking down the hall and you hear things like, that guy Dean, kid's so dumb he can't even read, right? Or you get the best one is the teacher-parent conference, where they're like, Dean's a smart kid, but if he just tried harder, I think he's a little bit lazy, okay? And so what happens is that you formulate this malignant self-esteem. You start to believe, no matter how strong your personal resolve may be, you start to believe what everyone is telling you. So it should come as no surprise, right? You transition into middle school and you're looking at high school and you're thinking, okay, who am I going to be, right? We all remember that. That was a horrible experience, right? Trying to define who we were going to be in our cult, in our pack, in our community, right? And we knew instantly that we were not going to be the smart kid. I mean, albeit the wrong assessment, but we knew that we weren't going to be the smart kid, and maybe we were the gifted jock. But chances are we looked at the kids after school smoking reefer on the bleachers, right? Or the kids throwing, rocks through glass, or, somebody maybe even getting involved in a little bit of gang involvement. And we think to ourselves, well, they've got a very, very low barrier to entry, right? I can be that guy. That's very easy, right? And so we naturally gravitate towards those identities. And, statistically, it's a very sad story. 35% of all dyslexics drop out of high school. And 50% of all adolescents involved in drug and alcohol rehabilitation have dyslexia. Another whammy is 60%. In fact, the people in the professionals say it's more like 70%, but I think that's outlandish. The people that work in the juvenile detention system say that 70% of all juvenile delinquents have dyslexia. So that is a very strong and depressing narrative, obviously. But we all have heard, right? I've heard an earlier speaker talk about Einstein, right? We have all heard how Einstein is dyslexic, right? JFK, Pablo Picasso, Leonardo da Vinci, Richard Branson, Charles Schwab. I mean, the laundry list is endless, right? In fact, dyslexics, when they are fully empowered and they recognize that innate intelligence, represent 35% of all entrepreneurs. They represent 40% of all self-made millionaires. And those rocket scientists down at NASA? 1 out of 2 of them is dyslexic. My favorite, because I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, is this, easy to get into school called MIT. They call dyslexia the MIT disease, right? So I have kind of toiled with this notion of why it is that, my people, right, suffer these huge delta in outcomes. And about a year and a half ago, I found myself in a learning disability conference, which is the worst name you could think of. And I was listening to these professors, and they were really impressive. They had, 3 or 4 acronyms behind their last names. And they were sitting there saying, the way that we need to teach dyslexic learners is through 2 things. We need to teach them social emotional learning and executive functioning methodology. Okay, that's code word for sequencing and time management and emotional intelligence, okay? And I sat there like you all did, and I was just getting a little hot under the collar. Like, man, what they don't get is that adding another discipline to an already frustrated student is like, all right, boys and girls, you headed off to the gulag. Here is an 800-pound sledgehammer called social emotional learning executive functioning. Take this. It's really going to help when you get there. It makes absolutely no sense. So I was frustrated, and I went into a conference, a little breakout session that was hosted by the Carroll School, which is up in Lincoln, Massachusetts, K through 8, dyslexic only. And the head of the school, a brilliant guy named Steve Wilkins, was so smart. He said, I'm not going to stand up and talk to a room full of educators. Let me put my kids up there, right? So I remember this one eighth grader, right? This gangly little dude. He went up. He's all nervous and kind of pulls, standing in front of a room like this, and he reaches into this backpack and he pulls out this size 11 basketball high top, and on the heel he's got this like erector set attached, right, and this long cord leading out of it, and he explains to everybody that this is his prototype for a shoe that enables him to charge a cell phone while he walked. And everyone, yeah, right? That's everyone else's reaction. It's like, that's really good, man, right? Yeah, there's some technical issues, right? But let's, that's details. But the beauty was that the moment this kid's presentation ended, every arm in the place shot up, right? And all of these very impressive educators going, how did you think of that? That's so creative. And I watched this kid literally, this little eighth grader, like blossom into this deity. Right? That kid was going to walk out of that presentation hall, and he was never, ever, ever going to believe that he was stupid or lazy or indolent. In fact, the kid is probably 5 years from now going out to Palo Alto and giving Zuckerberg, right, a run for his money, right? He's going to displace Zuckerberg. This kid was so empowered. And I thought to myself, here's the answer. Here is the answer. What we have to do is we have to take these students who are so disenfranchised, so frustrated, so thirsty for positive reinforcement, and introduce them to that cognitive skill set that they have, which is a direct result of the construction of their brains. And as I said earlier, entrepreneurship, engineering, architecture, and the arts, what we need to do is take those subject matters, those vocations, distill them to an age-appropriate middle school level, and then once we've got these learners hooked, we can embed it with that social emotional learning and that executive functioning methodology, because I can attest that once you've got a captive dyslexic, they are ravenous. They are thirsty. They've built up this moxie and this grit, and then all of a sudden you're revealing something that they're better at against their peers. This is a brand new message. And so I'm in Cambridge, like I said, right, the Saudi Arabia of academics, right? And I went to the best institutions. I went to Harvard School of Education, I went to Tufts University, and I went to Carroll School. And I said, this is what I want to build. I said, we're down. It sounds brilliant. Nobody's done that. Not brilliant, okay. I hope they said that's brilliant. They said we're interested, okay? Sorry, a little artistic liberty, I guess, but still working out some issues from my youth. But the beauty was that they got on board, and then I was faced with the question is, okay, how do I avoid the mistake of the traditional educational path, right? How do I avoid text as that barrier to entry? So I hunted around, and it turns out that Harvard, MIT, and Stanford University have created something called edX. edX is a state-of-the-art internet platform where they provide their MOOCs, their massively open online curricula, okay? And because these three universities have, the GDP of a small country, each one of them, they said, well, part of building this and part of our social responsibility is open source our software, which means that anybody can utilize the state-of-the-art technology to create their own MOOCs. So I found a company that works between me as the content provider and this software, and we determined that I could actually offer every single one of my lesson plans through a variety of modalities, right? I could offer my lesson plan through a video presentation. I could offer it through an audio presentation or a graphic or a pictorial representation, which enables that dyslexic learner to access the information without having to stumble over text as that barrier. Now, I don't want to ever be mistaken for saying that dyslexics don't have to learn how to read. They absolutely do. But the point is this, is that if we can get to these kids when they're in middle school and we can access or reveal to them what their inherent capacities are, before, as my friend Ben Foss, another friend in the field says, before the cement of their personality is solidified, we can theoretically, and I hope to prove this, we can take these kids, empower them in such a way that we can not only reduce attrition rates and reduce drug and alcohol and incarceration rates, but better yet is we can give birth to these kids. They can access within themselves a new narrative, an empowered narrative, where they can go out And they can join the ranks of those famous dyslexics that I listed earlier. But more importantly, so these individuals can become self-actualized, satisfied, content, confident human beings. And I'll end it on this. There are a lot of problems facing today's society. And a lot, I think the previous speaker was speaking about the environment, riddled with problems, right? Some of the most creative, innovative minds are at this moment atrophying behind bars. And that's all a result of a system that insists upon the most archaic form of educational medium, text. So, I hope I'll get invited back in 5 years. And I'll be able to explain to you, and I know better yet, I'll be able to put up a panel of my students, that's non-TEDx, but let's say, put up a panel of my newly empowered little dyslexic brother and sisters and let them show you what it is they've invented or what it is that they're going to do to solve some sort of environmental problem. So I'm so grateful to have had this opportunity to speak to you all, to hopefully tell you a little bit more about this dyslexic potential that we're trying to unlock. So I thank you so much for being here. Thank you.